welcome to Them's Writin Words, a podcast discussing selected fanfictions from the world of pastel horse literature. My name is Scribbler, and I will be your moderator today. Joining me for this discussion, we have Clever Hooves.
Howdy.
Midnight29.
Hello.
Skywriter.
Happy to be here as always.
And Vladi Voices.
Hello.
Oh, I'm surprised you didn't start with bruh.
I told you I'd be good as soon as we started.
You'll forgive me if I didn't quite believe you. Today we're looking at the fanfic Carry Me Home, My PropMaster, as chosen by Midnight. The synopsis, as she is going to read it, is...
Spike carries each of the most important ponies in his life home after a long day.
The story was published between 26th of September and 6th of October 2017 and clocks in at 14,866 words. Okay, so as ever, we'll go for the spoiler-free bit of the podcast to begin with. People can listen to that, see if this sounds like a story they're interested in. We'll signal when the spoilers start, and you can either join us for spoiler talk and get spoiled, or go read the story and then come back. Okay? Okay. So, first of all, I'm going to start with you, Midnight. Tags. Do we believe they are accurate? The only tags on this one are slice of life and sad.
For the most part, yeah, I think so. That pretty much sums it up entirely. I'm not exactly sure what else you could add.
One would think tragedy, but you know. Clever, what do you think?
I think they need Soul Destroyer, perhaps a warning label. I get warning labels on my medication that say should not take while operating heavy machinery. There needs to be a warning label like that on this one.
So a trigger warning.
Yes, actually. I was being a bit sarcastic, but that's legitimate. I think that this could break a person if they are so inclined.
I do kind of agree. I read a lot of stuff on AO3, and I must admit their tag system has a lot to be desired, but the trigger warnings on there I do appreciate a lot. Skywriter, what do you think about the tags here?
I don't know how you could call it anything other than slice of life and sad simultaneously. What else is there in this story, basically? So no complaints here.
And Vladi?
Very much agree with the tags. It is very realistic in everyday life and also the tragedies of said everyday life.
Okay, so Midnight's going to give a spoiler-free description of the story. We're going to give our overall opinions of the story in a spoiler-free fashion, and then spoilers will kick in. So, Midnight, your spoiler-free summary of the story, please.
Okay. This is where my brain prepared something, but I don't remember what it prepared. Basically, it is as the description says. Spike carries each of his favorite people or ponies home. Each of them having their own experience through it and lessons, both either Spike or the character in question. It does concentrate mainly on the main six, and Starlight Glimmer.
Such sass. Whoa.
Well, I'll get into that later. And yeah, it is set after from our point of view, the story ends. From what we've seen in the show, the story ends. So it's very much more future orientated. So it's the future of what, through Spike's eyes, happens to both him and his friends. And it's very, very, very sweet and makes you cry. So yeah, if you are going to watch it, listen to it on, it's one of the reasons why I did a reading of it, or read it, have a pair of tissues nearby, or a box, or several.
What are our general opinions on this? I'm going to start at the end with Vladi.
I think it was a very good story. Very good story. And it very much talks about the real feelings that people have. It's kind of a good cry, I think.
Skywriter?
Yeah, I mean, without going into too many spoilers, this is broadly classed as an immortality blues story, which is I think a kind of an overstuffed genre, which can be easily evoked for emotional clout. I think that it can be done. It can cover the obvious emotional content can sometimes in other stories of the genre cover up a sort of a insufficient or sort of mediocre writing. I thought this was a really good example of it. I mean, I thought the prose was quite well polished for a story of this genre. So I thought it was pretty good.
And clever?
It broke me. If you read literature for escapism, this is grounded in the author's truth, and it's very real and I think necessary, but I don't think everyone is always necessarily prepared for, because when you say sad, it very often is, oh, well, that's a bit tragic. That's, you're not personally involved as much, but this somehow goes right to the core and really hits, pushes a lot of buttons that I think a lot of people can identify with. And so I almost feel like there needs to be that extra warning that I was referring to earlier, that they're sad and then they're sad. And this one hits it better than most. One of the things that I think help it along is the fact that it mirrors the show in a way, in a certain kind of tone that I want to talk about later after we get into the spoiler territory. But overall, very well written. Definitely, if you are having trouble getting into a state of catharsis, this will help you there.
Okay, so we're going into spoilers now. So if this sounds intriguing to any of our listeners, Midnight has a reading on her channel. If you would, I'll link that in the doobly-doo below. If you would rather read it for yourself, also a link in the doobly-doo. But we, from here on, are going to be in spoiler territory. So Midnight is going to kick us off with a full plot summary this time, completely spoilery. Midnight?
Alrighty then. This follows Spike through between Rainbow Dash and Fluttershy. It's only a couple of days, but further down it seems to skip a good number of years. It concentrates on Rainbow Dash, who is pushing herself too hard and pretty much nearly crashes and burns, and Spike has to tell her off. And Rainbow Dash is learning, I need to keep track of myself and need to realize I'm getting older. I can't stay in my prime. The next one is Fluttershy, who basically tells Spike off for being too what's that word? Mollycoddling?
Mollycoddling.
That's the word. As he tries to look after Fluttershy, and Fluttershy's like, no, it's okay. I know when to ask for help. I'm not Rainbow Dash. I'm Fluttershy. I know when to do it. Though, arguably, she needs some help, struggling from what is written. Applejack is pulling a Rainbow Dash as well. She's out being sick when she should be inside, and is getting a telling off from Spike as well. There's a lot of Spike telling off people, which is a little bit weird.
To be fair, Big Mac did a lot of telling off in that chapter too.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Though Spike, yeah. So basically, Rainbow Dash and Applejack have a similar sort of situation, but different enough that it doesn't feel like a repeat, which is quite nice. And Applejack's asking about the future and how Spike is going to deal with basically living for a lot longer than the rest of them, because he's still young, dragon-wise, at this point. Then there's Starlight Glimmer, who is suffering from an illness very akin to cancer, which I can strangely relate to quite a bit. The way she's feeling and how she wants to live, just concentrate on enjoying the moment. Pinkie Pie has an accident and becomes paralyzed. And Spike has to help her give one last hurrah to one of the twins.
Angel Cake. It's
Angel Cake.
I think it's her own grandchild or great-grandchild. Several generations down, though.
Yeah. And it's so sad that she's like, I can't go yet. I can't ruin her day. And Spike's like, okay, we'll do all this, and basically lets her run the entire thing on his back before they walk off to the hospital. Rarities actually hit home for me the most, even though I can relate to Starlight Glimmers, but Rarity's suffering from Alzheimer's, and this is quite even further in the future, where Spike can't even get in the door of the boutique anymore. And Twilight has to cast a spell and everything to make him look smaller so that Rarity can see him again but not be terrified. And that's when Spike learns the lesson of life is... Shoot, the word's gone out of my head. Life is full of sorrow. Yeah, sorrow movements or something. Sorrow...
The mundane cruelties of life.
Yeah. And then Twilight. Now, it flips the story a little bit, where instead Twilight is actually the one that carries Spike, which I have to admit is quite hard to believe, considering at this point he's a fully grown giant dragon. I know she's an alicorn, but can she really lift that much weight?
I mean, she lifts the sun and the moon at this point in the timeline.
True, but I don't know. I'm just imagining this giant dragon walking beside this tiny little pony. And he's actually coming to the end as well now. Though he's...
Hang on, I thought it was just implied that he was going into his 100-year sleep. So he'd reached that stage where he wasn't dying, but he was going away for a bit and going for his dragon sleep.
That's why
the smoke was coming out of his nostrils.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. I think you're right.
Well,
my bad.
Maybe not. But the author has a commentary, but we'll save that for later.
A little lesson learned from every single one, as Spike carries his friends home in some shape or form or the other. And yes, it did have me in tears more than once.
So when did this story get written relative to the series? It appears there's guesswork on some of the futures, for example, RD and Applejack. Clever. This is your point, so do you want to take this?
Well, actually, it was legitimately a question that I had, and I'm not really good at relating when things were written relative to what was going on in the series at the time. I'm terrible at that. But from what I could glean from it, it wasn't obvious that the last episode was taken into consideration when this was written. So, for instance, like...
if this was written in 2017, the last episode hadn't aired yet. It was still in Series 8, I think. The school one. The one with the school and Cozy Glow. Fairly certain that's the season that had just aired.
Okay, see, that's what I wanted to know. And that's... I mean, it's apparent that this is written before the series ended. Just because things like RD and Applejack don't appear to be together, which is, of course, made canon in the last episode. And also unclear is that it seems that although Twilight is a princess, it's not clear that Celestia and Luna are necessarily retired. There's a few lines in there that suggest that.
Oh, you mean it did it better than the show? Fucking retirement for alicorns. What the fuck?
Yeah. So, like, Twilight is supposed to have remained in Ponyville, and it doesn't seem like she necessarily is like the ruler of Equestria per se. So just some small stuff that lead, that if you've watched the entire series, that you kind of get a sense of that this may have been written before some of the canon show stuff happened. I don't think it takes anything away from the story or the poignancy or even how well it seems to dovetail with the series. I would argue that this particular story almost would make a better ending than the one we got in some respects. But that's not what this point was about. I just really was curious about where this was written relative to the show.
What are other people's opinions on this? The idea of this dovetails from a point in canon that doesn't include the last couple of seasons. Do we think this loses anything for that, Skywriter?
I don't think it loses anything per se. It's just that this was clear. Just actively checking Wikipedia versus the time. This is written at the post season 7, prior to the My Little Pony feature film. Season 7 was recovering the pillars of Equestria, so that predated the School of Friendship plotline entirely, which was notable because never was that mentioned. Any, the future of any hypothetical School of Friendship construction wasn't ever mentioned in the future forward look that we took at this. So I think that it's pretty as clearly as was written from a position right after the season that it was written during. So
I did not even remember the pillars were a thing. Were they mentioned at all in this story?
No.
Nope.
Maybe it was written mid-season then. I would argue that the show seemed to forget that they existed as well for large chunks of its final seasons. But that is an entirely different conversation. Right, so we'll go on to brief highlighting of later points like tone and pacing and things. What do people think of the tone? Obviously, this is going for a sad and tragic tone, and I think I know what answers I'm going to get, but still. We'll start with Laddie. Do you think the tone and the pacing works and is successful in what it sets out to do?
I think it did a great job on that. It feels like it's just a snippet in the middle of each of their lives and that we get to see a piece of. It doesn't really have like a set like beginning or end really, but it does feel like genuine little snapshots of those moments, which is what it seemed to be going for, and I think it does it very well.
Skywriter?
I mean, I think this is a mournful tone. It's very clearly a mournful tone. There's not a lot of comic relief here. I don't know if this is the best place to bring this up, but I'm trying to think that something was bothering me when I was reading this one, and it struck me as I was reading this that this doesn't really feel like a story about death and decrepitude. It doesn't feel like an analysis of that. It feels like an analysis of the fear of death and decrepitude. It feels like someone, and reading some of the author's notes that accompany this one, that there is some sort of a real world synergy between this. But this seems like it's an exploration of what it's like to be afraid of death and illness, rather than an exploration of the process of going through death and illness, which is, I thought it's an interesting subtlety, but I thought it was worth noting.
Midnight?
Actually, that's actually true, because the only one to actually pass is technically Rarity.
Well, the only one to pass on screen, as it were. There is the implication that she is the last one at the point where we meet her dying.
That is actually very true, yeah. The only one on screen, for lack of a better word. But yeah, I would have to say the tone and the pacing, it all links together very nicely. And although, yes, there's no necessarily comic relief, there are lighter moments, so it doesn't feel like it's just all pressure on you, if that makes any sense. Of all the sadness, because there are some like little bits and pieces, but not enough to completely take away from the story in itself. So yeah, I think the writer did an amazing job for the most part.
And Clever?
I applaud the author for doing a slow burn, and I also think it's interesting just in terms of the pacing, the choices that were made, and the explorations that Spike decides, or the author decides to do. There was a comment, I have this later in the list, but I'll bring it up now because it's appropriate. One of the comments said, an absolutely stellar piece of writing, been sitting on my shelf to read for too long. I like how the story progressed. It grew heavier and more serious, much like how growing old is apt to do. Masterfully done. And the author responded, glad you enjoyed the story. That was pretty much my intent on it. Thanks for catching the tone. And I really felt that was accurate. I felt that there was this progression that starts off slow, and then it seems to pick up, and the seriousness picks up, and the tragedy, if you will, picks up. And then at the end, we're given a little bit of a break, I guess. And I appreciated that, because on the penultimate chapter, boy, I like it. It just, Rarity's chapter really broke me, and that having something after that to try and mellow it out a bit, I think was necessary, and I appreciated that very much.
Okay, which does lead us nicely into our next point, which is characterization. Do we feel it's accurate for each of these characters? Now, this is an odd fic in that it is literally it is delineated into chapters, each of which is the name of one of the ponies that Spike is carrying. So rather than go for it all at once, I'm first of all going to ask, do we feel it's accurate for Spike? And I'm going to start with Clever on this one. I'm going to go back to front again. So, Clever, do you think this is accurate just purely for Spike to begin with?
That's a tough one. I mean, he's the one character that if there was an issue with, it might be him. And it's weird, and why I even say I might even have mild issue with it, is that relative to the other characters, and you can argue that this is a reasonable author's choice, he seems really content to not really have expanded his role very much in his world. And while the other ones are kind of going through and aging, and they've gone and done different things and had families and whatnot, he just has remained much more static as a character. And again, you can argue, well, he lives hundreds of years. Maybe that's just normal. He's just gotten bigger and grown in size, but not necessarily, maybe he has different motivations. I don't know. For the purpose of the story, he seems kind of stunted a little bit that way, but in other ways he comes across very full of wisdom at the same time. I don't know. There's an emotional maturity to him that seems odd, given how his character is portrayed at times. So I don't think too much about it, because as much as it's about him, it's also not about him. And I don't get caught up in it, and it doesn't distract me from the story until I sit and think about it too much. And
Midnight?
I would have to agree. This doesn't seem like the Spike that we know, necessarily. But at the same time, we've seen in the show that Spike sometimes has actually more wisdom than the rest of the ponies ever give him credit for. They just don't listen to him. So, yeah, he's more of a person for us to see through, rather than necessarily show accurate. It doesn't bother me that he may not be quite the same Spike we know, but then again, from the very beginning we can tell that this is many years afterwards, so I don't really know what Spike's like now, other than being Twilight's #1 assistant. And it could be that he's just still #1 assistant. Why would he change? But, yeah, with Spike, maybe not quite show accurate, but it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't really impact it in many ways. At least for me.
Skywriter?
Spike is the author insert character here. He is the voice of the author speaking. Generally speaking, when this happens, there is going to be some distortion. when you're viewing the characters from an outside lens, you can pick up on their mannerisms, you can pick up on their quirks, you can pick up on a point where people will say, oh, that's so Pinkie Pie, that's so Rarity, that's so much this one character that you've encapsulated it, which is more difficult to do when it's your author, when it's your author character. I would say there was no one particular point in the entirety of this story that made me have that delighted reaction to a recognizable character from the show. I don't recall any one point where I'd say, oh, that's so Spike. It isn't so Spike. Now, again, narratively, as some of the previous commenters have noted, narratively, this could possibly be a little more forgiven because Spike is, for all of his ability to act like a capable adult, he is narratively presented as, as a baby, as a child, someone whose personality is not completely molded, or he hasn't reached his adult personality yet. He really is literally still in the words of the series, he is a baby dragon. So I don't think it bothered me as such because, it's something that I felt like, yeah, it's like, okay, well, maybe we just haven't really seen what adult Spike is like in his adult form. So if his personality is different than the show, is like maybe we didn't see fully formed Spike personality, and maybe this is it. I don't know. It's an interesting take on it. It's a possible take on it, but it's nothing that I really particularly made me have a flash of recognition of character-based writing about it. And I think ultimately, that's because Spike was the POV character in this and was expressing sort of like the author's mentality, if not his viewpoints at the time. So,
And Vladdy?
I'd have to argue and say that I think it does fit, at least from my perspective, would be like an adult Spike, because he still retains like the desire to want to help out, but now he has the body to back it up, and he's still really cares about him, and he's had his moments even as a baby dragon to have moments of wisdom and be the voice of reason, but now it kind of feels like just the immaturity that we kind of associate with him has been stripped away now that he's an adult. And yes, very much can be written off as like a writer's interpretation and aging and such. But I think is really fitting, and I actually related to him the most in the story, being that I used to be just a dumb kid, and my mom always took care of me, and now that she's getting older, I'm having to help her a lot, and now she's able to rely on me now as an adult. And I just really related to that. I could respect that of him having to step up and be the adult when the adults who took care of you and raised you are now in need of your help.
Which does lead us on to our next point, which is impressions of the prose style. How does this story read? We know it's trying to achieve this sadness tone. How well does it achieve this regarding the other characters? I'm going to pull these 2 points together because this characterization of these other characters within it, because Spike is our POV character, so to speak. It's not first person written. It's very much bound up together that we get these little snippets of these moments where the main six plus Starlight and Spike are at their weakest. Because that is the central conceit of the story, does that affect the pacing and therefore the characterization, where we're looking at these characters at these different weak points of their lives? Clever?
Well, I just wanted to point something out before we got too far in this. Whilst you are the moderator, I am very curious to hear what you thought of the characterization of Spike.
I deliberately was staying quiet because I didn't think it sounded like Spike at all.
That's what
It felt like generic, this is the author insert through which we're going to look at the characters who actually get characterization. I don't know what else to say. The only bit where it actually felt like Spike was his attachment to Rarity, and even that when they admitted that she was the last of the main six aside from Twilight, felt more perfunctory. And that's I think part of it is I'm just very cynical because I've read a lot of stories like this before for a lot of fandoms and a lot of characters. And therefore, this story, I didn't find it particularly sad, but that's purely from my own frame of reference that I've seen it before. If you haven't got my very cynical frame of reference, it will probably have more emotional impact. Okay, you forced me to show my hand when I was trying to be nice.
I wanted to hear it. I noticed you particularly were ignoring your own thoughts, so...
That's because I really like PropMaster as an author and I don't want to shit on his work.
Fair enough, but it's them's Writing Words with Scribbler and friends, so don't forget about Scribbler.
Meow. Anyway, you now get to talk about whether or not you think the characterization of the other ponies fits, especially regarding the fact that we are just dipping in and out of their worst moments.
Well, the little vignettes that make up this story are I think they're well conceived, and I think that it's nice that the author tries really hard to come up with different situations and to try and match the appropriate pony to the situations. I think, for instance, like RD and AJ, probably, those ones wrote themselves. RD pushing herself for too long and potentially, gonna go out on a being stupid really seems to fit with RD. And Applejack, working past. I mean, these are both tropes that appear in the show, and they very much. I feel like the characterizations are strong in those two. But they and Fluttershy's seems pretty good as well. I have to tip my hat. I think she's a tough character to write, and to balance it while making her not just this almost pitiable character that just can't ever express her own thoughts or feelings. I feel like there was a good balance done with Fluttershy. The one I think that strikes me as being perhaps the biggest challenge in writing this would have been Starlight Glimmer. And I think the author did a fantastic job with Starlight. Although I'm not certain.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you here and ask you a question.
Go for it.
And I'd be quite happy to be proven wrong on this, because I thought that Pinkie, the Rainbow Dash, the Applejack, the Fluttershy chapters, and even the Twilight chapter and Rarity, all really in character for each of those characters. You've heard my issue with Spike. Name me one thing that made Starlight Glimmer, and not generic pony number 4.
Yeah. And this is where it's a challenge, right? Because I don't know.
No. Tell me. You just said that you thought that Starlight Glimmer's chapter was well written. What makes that character Starlight Glimmer?
I felt the chapter was well written, and I was about to get to the point where I said...
You don't get to call me out without me calling you out.
That's fine. I was about to get to the point where I was going to say that this one didn't have the same natural conclusion that you would in the show. Like Pinkie struggling to have her last party. Like these are all conflicts that have to do with some core part of their personality. And Starlight goes through so much growth in the show that she starts off wanting to it depends on how you read her story, right? We first meet her from our perspective. She's trying to control everybody because she wants to control everybody. And, every pony's, the same kind of thing.
Unresolved childhood trauma.
Yeah, and we find out later that it's unresolved childhood trauma. But later she resolves that childhood trauma, within the show. And so we see this individual sort of become a much more mature individual. And so she still seems to be growing by the end of the show, and certainly by the time that this story was written. So what do we know about her? Well, she likes kites, and if she gets cancer, does her reaction in this moment seem reasonable for the character? And I think it's reasonable for anybody, and I think that's both genius in picking Starlight for this particular moment, because I think that her character allows for us to believe in this particular moment, and that she, while we get to know her, is still sort of a forming character. She changes dramatically throughout the series. So
I am going to have words after
I'm good. I'm glad, because I want your words. But I appreciated it.
Do you want my words if they're fuck off?
Always.
Mom and Uncle are fighting
Always.
again.
Hey, it's not a podcast unless I've told everybody to fuck off.
Yes. So get it out of the way.
Everyone fuck off. There we go.
There we go. Well, yeah. Well, you toss off, you Brit. Now,
I don't think that's the only thing it is.
I was trying to be nice. Anyway.
Carry on.
No, she is there's the description and the interaction between them is very real. There's a verisimilitude that's there that clearly makes it feel like that this is a snapshot in someone's real life. Like there is a level of realism between the two emotionally that seems to really resonate, at least with me. It seems very real. It seems like something that would happen. Maybe it's because I was recently in the hospital, and I felt a little bit like Starlight. Like I just want to feel normal right now. I'm tired of trying to make other people feel better when they're looking at you a certain way and so on. Like I just want this space, and that just felt entirely exceptionally real. So while that's why I say that I felt it was well written. I felt that perspective of aging, being ill, I felt that was a good one to include, and I felt that it was most appropriately with Starlight. And I love the idea of the kite flying and then incorporating her basically asking to be flown so that she could be like her kite. Like there was something great about that idea, and I would love to hear how that could be improved by somehow bettering Starlight's characterization. I would love to hear people's thoughts on that. Go, Scribbler. Tell us.
Well, bettering that chapter. I don't know if there's a way of bettering the chapter, so to speak, but I do think that it was saying that Starlight was still a character who could be just slotted in and out like any other at that point in canon is a bit of a misnomer, because I would argue that she'd had more growth than any other character by this point in canon, with the possible exception of Twilight, because she started at such an interesting point in season 1. But the other characters, in as much as they had character growth, theirs was not as much as Starlight Glimmer, and therefore I would argue the author had more to work with Starlight and kind of squandered it all to put in generic pony number 4. Sorry, that's my opinion. Skywriter?
Yeah, the thing I was missing out of the Starlight chapter was her ambition. I felt like it was an authentic. Okay, I agree that it was an authentic. It was an authentic interaction, but was it authentically Starlight Glimmer? And I would argue no. I would argue that what we didn't see out of Starlight, we see Starlight as we see facts about Starlight. We see her love of kites and the fact that she was grateful to Spike for sharing living quarters with them when she first came to Ponyville. Those were all facts about her, but I didn't feel the sense of Starlight, that sense of overreach, overcorrection in either direction, that she doesn't have a sense of proportion, that she goes too far. I would have, in answer to the question of how we could have improved Starlight's characterization, so she has basically magic pony cancer, which I have my own issues with, but we could talk about that later, maybe.
No. Talk about it now, because it's
no. There actually
integral.
is a topic that would fit better into. But
Okay.
what I wanted to see, and what I was reading into this, is that Starlight got magic pony cancer because she was ambitious, because she was overcorrecting, because she was like, it should have been, I thought, maybe stressed more, that she was like almost like a Marie Curie figure, that she was so deep into trying to like do something that would better Equestria, that would make up for her past sins, her past failures, that she pushed herself too far in that direction. She seems very passive in this chapter. She seems to be something that she's working with the treatments of magic cancer, and it is fun that she's interested in experimental medicine treatments for her magic pony cancer, and that gave me a flicker of that, because it's like, oh yeah, of course Starlight would want the most, would look into the most cutting edge, but she's very, I guess, again, I don't want to reuse the same word, but she is more passive than I would have expected Starlight Glimmer to be at this point in her life, even at this point in her life, many years after canon that we see. I don't see those hallmark touchstones that I see out of a Starlight, when I see Starlight in the series. I don't see them here.
You just articulated everything I could possibly have said about that. Clever?
I just wanted to say, see, now in answering that question, I think I understand where the character was missing. And that's partly, I guess I in reading it, I didn't come in with as strong a sense of who Starlight is. And hearing that, Skywriter, I just want to thank you. And I also think that you're right, that there was a potential to bring in that maybe if she somehow, through her overreach, brought that cancer upon and then had to deal with some of that internal conflict about still trying to make up for past deeds, I think could have led it to a bit more meaningful of a Starlight moment. So that was great. That's what I wanted to hear. That's what I wanted to know. I don't know where Scribbler is, but go for it, Vladdy.
I was here. I was pressing the button. Vladdy, go for it.
Yeah, brain fart. I'm sorry. All right, so, yeah, it seems like kind of, honestly, all I can think of for Starlight's personality. If she's not twilighting, she's riddled with guilt. So, if anything, maybe something I kind of just kept in the back of my head for her in her chapter that I think maybe she should have realized was maybe she's been like troubled with like a sense of like guilt and karma, like thinking like, oh, I got this cancer stuff because of my past evil deeds, because of how bad of a person I am. So maybe I haven't done enough good to outbalance that, and so I'm gonna die. And so then maybe all those thoughts race in her head, and she's kind of wanting to just take a step back and be like, you know what? I just want to look at the kite. I don't want to deal with anything else. So that's what I had in my mind. And maybe if she focalized that would kind of characterize her a bit better than, as Scribbler said, being pony number 4. But otherwise, I really liked how it was written. It felt like most of her characterization maybe came from how Spike saw her, how he interpreted her and stuff, and like the already established relationship of being roommates and in the castle and knowing each other and such.
Midnight?
As I said earlier, Starlight Glimmer was an odd one for me to be in there. That might be just because personally I prefer just the original main 6. And so having Starlight Glimmer right in the middle was like, wait, what? Why is she here? But at the same time, I personally don't see how the whole cancer thing could have related to any of the other main 6. I mean, you could have given it to any of them, but they would all not reacted the same way. Yes, the characterization of Starlight Glimmer in the chapter, maybe not that great. Maybe you could have used a little bit of backstory, as you guys say. Maybe one of her ambitions with Sunburst caused this. But at the same time, as someone who's been through that, been the patient, her whole thing of talking to Spike, being like, look, I don't want to answer any more questions. I don't want to comfort people. I don't want to do that right now. I've done that a gazillion times already. I just want to fly my kite and enjoy the day. It is far too relatable. Far too relatable. For me, it was cooking rather than flying a kite, because I couldn't fly a kite to save my life. But it was well written. I agree maybe someone else could have easily been slipped in there, but I don't think it could have been any of the main 6. So in the end, who else would you put there? Maybe, I don't know, Sunset Shimmer? But she's in another universe. So, yeah.
This is post-canon. They could have brought her back.
True, but I don't see her leaving the world, to be honest. She's far too at home. Far too well at home. Like, the only reason I see that happening is if she accidentally runs into herself, her human self.
Or she gets human cancer and comes back to Pokemon to have it fixed.
That could have worked, I guess, yeah. That could have worked.
She would have been more suited to the passive role that Starlight Glimmer had.
But then it would have been harder to figure out Spike's relationship with her.
Agreed.
Given that we've decided this isn't really a good Starlight Glimmer interpretation, you literally just could have transposed Spike's relationship with this version of Starlight Glimmer onto Sunset Shimmer. Vladdy, you have something to say?
Yeah, just another possible character. I could imagine, like, since this conversation, that you could have a mod be very passive and stuff, but again, the problem with not having a relationship with Spike. But just wanted to throw that in.
Ooh, Maud could have worked quite well. Maud could have worked quite well, except she doesn't show her emotions as much. So, yeah.
What about Sunburst?
True.
He is a very, very passive character. Yeah, he's very passive, which would fit the role that this story needed.
They could have played chess instead.
Yeah, and he does have a relationship with Spike, because Spike's always in the Crystal Empire. He is the great and powerful Spike after all.
Oh, and he's also a scientist, so he probably would want to have a chat with Spike anyway about dragon shit, and so, you know, that could have actually worked good as well.
Or Big Mac. They play gobliettes.
True.
Discord?
Not Discord, because he wouldn't have really had pony cancer.
He'd snap his fingers, it'd be gone.
Yeah, same reason it couldn't really be Celestia or Luna. But Big Mac would work, and Spike has a pre-existing relationship with him.
Rayburn?
Does Spike have a pre-existing relationship with him?
Not in the same way.
No.
Not really. No.
It would work with Big Mac, because canon went out of its way for us to understand that they had a relationship. And Big Mac, again, is a much more passive character than Starlight Glimmer.
And is already in the chapter beforehand as well.
Yep, same with Fluttershy and Rainbow Dash. They followed on naturally from each other.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing. I guess maybe seeing Big Mac being super vulnerable would potentially hold a lot of emotional fuel to it as well. But I don't know. I really like Starlight Glimmer here.
And that's fair. Maybe they just needed to add a bit more spices into her thing for it to fully work.
Yeah, that ambition. What Skywriter suggested, I would have had no problem with this chapter or this characterization if her ambition had been in there and her innate intrinsic guilt. So you want about Starlight Starlight Gimli is a whole other character, but Starlight Glimmer is characterized by her guilt over the fact that she spent so many years fucking other ponies up.
Agreed.
Right, we're going on to Clever's favourite comment, which does segue quite nicely into Starlight Glimmer. Clever!
Right? So Present Perfect, who is an author that I enjoy reading, and a very prolific commentator, says in this, "Yo, Starlight Cancer I can handle. This is monstrous. How dare?" And this is in response to the Pinkie Pie chapter, which it's interesting because you'd think that someone potentially dying of cancer might be heavier than a person who's likely to survive but will end up, being injured, until you read the chapters in order and you realize that somehow this one fits hits so much harder. And it may be because of that we see this as being Pinkie more than we see the other one as being Starlight, or maybe because we care more about Pinkie than we care about Starlight. I leave that up to other intellectuals to debate. But it is monstrous to think that how Pinkie gets taken out is from a sack of flour, somehow, and her own unwillingness to like give up on a party to then somehow as a consequence then be that she might end up being permanently paralyzed like that. Oh, and for her to have her last party, like oh, all those things, monstrous, but well done.
I think some of that might be connected to the fact that Pinkie is a perennial innocent, and she lives her entire life for others, and therefore the fact that she's taken out by such a mundane thing that could happen to anyone, while also giving of herself for others. And that moment where Spike says, "We have to get you medical attention," and she's like, but the party, I worked so hard. It does hit because it's a feeling that we've all had, and that she is a character who does not deserve this, in as much as anybody deserves terrible things happening to them. Bloody?
And also that with Starlight, there was a 50-50 chance at least that she would live, whereas with Pinkie, it was stated that this was going to be her very last party, and that she barely even got to finish that, as is, so it is a guaranteed loss, where unlike Starlight's 50-50 chance.
Yeah, what's worse is that if you know anything about medical stuff, you know that the minute that her legs started feeling tingly and all that she needed to get to the hospital or she would become paralyzed. But she didn't. And now she literally cannot move. Like, you know she is paralyzed. There's nothing they will be able to do for her other than make sure that it doesn't spread and that it heals properly. And although it'll be her last proper party, you can only hope it's not her last party, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, the last one she could attend as well as run.
Yeah.
And I think the thing, I'll admit, the Pinkie, I can't talk tonight. The Pinkie chapter did get to me because of this innate unfairness. And it's not like they was fair for any of the other characters, but there was an element of they knew what they were doing, whereas Pinkie was just kind of hoping it would go away on its own. And we all know someone, or we've been that person, or we've known a family member who just wanted the bad thing to go away on its own and ended up suffering as a result, and not being able to help them when that happens. This is one of those points where, like, the trigger warnings would have been quite helpful. Okay, we'll go on to the story's somber theme of anticipatory grief. Vladdy?
Yeah, so I was thinking after reading this, like, surely there's like an actual word for like this grief before the actual event happens, and lo and behold, just a quick type and anticipatory grief is a thing, which, yeah, it's kind of been mostly covered in the earlier statements that the themes of the story is the anticipatory grief, the kind of grieving the ends to come and stuff, either the ends of careers, the ends of lives, and all or parties, all of that. So that's kind of about all I had, since everything else was said earlier.
One that did hit me a bit was the Rarity one, not her death. And that, like I said, this story didn't affect me as much as it might have affected other people, purely because I have read too many stories like this. But each time Alzheimer's or senility come into things, I am immediately taken back to my nana, who from 2006 to 2016 lived alone 70 miles away from me, and every single weekend I went up for each day to clean her house and look after her, because she had oncoming senility. We didn't realize it to begin with, but it became progressively worse. And she had things like the anger outbursts, the inability to recognize us, thinking that we were doing things that we weren't, inviting strangers into the home, wandering away down the street, things like that. So to hear that with Rarity, I do like the idea that there is a hint that she has been in a degrading sense of mental health, and that the others have lived through this, that there is a lot of history here, and that this is the end point of a very long process. And I do think that that felt very realistic, having lived through it myself. Anybody else got any opinions on this anticipatory grief theme?
That's potent shit.
You have the heart and soul of a fucking poet.
Right.
Yeah, bitch. Okay, I'm going to assume we don't have anything more to say on that then.
Well, Vladdy was...
Oh, I did have one more thing I forgot I was want to say.
Go on.
Oh, God, I'm echoing. Oh, so, and I am stammering so much, I apologize. But I remember what I was originally typing in order to find, and...
Vladdy, you've gone silent.
Have you stopped hitting your push-to-talk button?
The amount of times I haven't done that.
Like career, our own youth and everything. It is something everyone goes through, and it is something to, we do learn how to deal with, and kind of a good thing to be aware of in life and stuff. It reminds me a lot of the anime movie. Oh, sorry. It's fading in and out. I'm sorry.
Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear. And sometimes
you were carrying on, and we didn't think you could hear us saying we can't hear you on and off.
My apologies. My internet's being crummy. I'll just leave it at that then. Sorry.
No worries. I think I had exactly the same thing earlier. Okay, so I'm not sure who put this in with the favourite comment.
Oh,
Coronet the Lesser and PropMaster.
Yeah, I did that earlier, and I already read it earlier. Sorry.
Okay, right. I will. The magic of editing, this conversation will never have happened.
Never.
All right, so the last friendship lesson. How this story dovetails with the series themes is an inevitable and perhaps necessary / required story. Clever, do you want to elaborate on what you mean here?
So, yeah, I mean, the theme of friendship is magic is kind of in the title there. And it's an exploration of relationships and relating. And the series goes through a number of different stories that look at testing various relationships and looking at how that can work together in a friendship. But one of the things that it shies away from, rightfully so, because of who the target audience was supposed to be, and what kind of show it was supposed to be, is it doesn't really deal with loss of this nature and changing relationships due to the slow losing of who you were due to age and illness and death. And I would call that the last friendship lesson that would be good for people to relate to and come to understand. I think one of the things that I found profound in this particular story, and maybe it's just a naive profundity, but was that the fear that we talked about earlier, this sadness and this anticipatory grief. By the end, Spike nor Twilight seem to really feel that way anymore, and that's because of their lived experiences, having gone through all this anticipatory grief, and they've seemed to have, by the end of the story, come to some kind of peace with it. And so we're left not with so much tragedy as we are with a kind of loving acceptance, almost sort of like a Buddhist-like mindset of dealing with this sort of change. And I I think that is the lesson, if there is one, here. And I feel that dovetails very well with the series. I felt that was something that could have been an episode had we been allowed to tell stories like this within the context of the series. And related to that, the relationship between Spike and the main six, there's no shipping really in the series, and there's like no shipping going on here either. I realize I'm attacking a point that I put on later, but I don't know, I'll talk about it a little bit now. As much as RD and AJ are together in canon afterwards, this isn't about that relationship. Each one is a relationship with Spike and his friends, and it's very much a friendship relationship, even with Rarity, even though he still has deep feelings. But they don't seem to be necessarily romantic. They are deep, and I liked that. I felt like this very much could have been a canon kind of thing if canon did this sort of thing.
Anyone else got any response to that? Skywriter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the last chapter, the thing about grief is that it is the process by which we return to normal functioning after a loss. And it's terrible and it's painful, but it is a process by which we go through, in order to return to normal functioning. So I thought, I'm sort of with Scribbler on this one. I was not overly moved by the story. I've felt a lot. I've read a lot of this before. This was a good example of it. But what I loved and what I really appreciated about this story was it does show us people who have apparently gone through a successful grieving process and have come through on the other side. This is not all too often, and I termed this as an immortality blues story in my introduction. All too often, there's like immortality blues, this specific story, and it's often about either Twilight's perceived immortality or Spike's genetic long life, is about, oh no, my friends, I will be alone forever. And that's just not the case. And I liked that throughout we saw the notion that new friendships continue to form, new relationships continue to form. Twilight, for however immortal she is not going to be sad forever about her her closest six friends dying, because there is a grief process. This is what we do, and I liked that it looked like they had resolved this and come to some sort of peace and hope for the future. And the story throughout showed new relationships forming, because that's really, if we are talking about the message of friendship is magic, it shouldn't be that there are six people and those are the best that you'll ever have, and nothing that you will ever experience will be the same as that. Friendship is continuous. It is ongoing, and it is a powerful thing. And I liked that. I really appreciated that take in this particular story.
Anyone else?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Right. Right, Vladdy. Next point is yours. The possible parallel between this story and the fandom. You want to elaborate?
I don't know, something, the fandom is dying, oh, boo-hoo. I don't know, I was trying to throw in an extra topic in there.
I mean, is the fandom dying?
Not really, but, I don't know, it's an emotional point people like bringing up, so I was like, let's throw it in there, maybe it'll get some talking going. I don't know, I'm just chilling, I'm tired.
Oh, bless. I don't think it's dying so much as it's become what most fandoms are, and that is slightly inert.
Yeah.
Skywriter?
I mean, we're still here.
Exactly. They're still producing content. How many years after the show finished?
Shh.
Yeah. It's almost
Don't
like, you know.
mention that.
Why? Because Save MLP will appear in the comments.
Maybe.
Don't jinx it.
Alright then. So, the lack of predictive shipping, it was kinda nice. Clever, I'm going to berate you for kinda instead of kind of. But otherwise, can you elaborate? Why did you like the fact there was no shipping at all in this?
I think that it allowed us not to get distracted from the main themes of the story. And while, I mean, I like a good ship, I do. And apparently this particular author is known for their romance writing. It was nice that the focus was on friendship and, the grieving that can happen with that as relationships grow and change. So I felt that it was appropriate that there wasn't shipping, predictive or otherwise. The only thing that that stood out to me was, and this was a question that I kind of was in my head a little bit, but not a lot, and only on second reading, was, so who did AJ end up with? Because they indicate that she's a mother and that she has kids. And I mean, I suppose it's possible that you could interpret that her and RD did end up together, though it doesn't really feel that way based on the way the story's told. But that was the only question I was left regarding shipping, because that person, whoever it was, does not seem to be in the picture at all. But other than that, as a kind of a side note, I really appreciate the lack of shipping. Again, because I think that would have maybe taken away from the story.
The only shipping I can see is Big Mac and Sugar Belle. That's literally the only mention of a couple.
Well, it's not even shipping, though. I mean, because they were, like, married.
I mean, that definitely counts as shipping. Shipping comes from relationship. Did that count?
It wasn't focused on that, though, only just as it being a state of fact rather than a point in the story. We didn't see Big Mac and Sugar Belle nuzzling noses and stuff.
True.
Verito.
So, Midnight, yours is the next point. Was there enough time to address the delicacy of each subject in the chapter that it was dedicated to it? For example, Starlight and her illness. We've already talked quite extensively about Starlight, but I'm presuming from the way you phrased this, you have thoughts about the other characters too?
In some ways, yes. I mean, for instance, with Rarity, chapter is the longest. It is. And it addresses the end of the illness. And everyone does seem to have, for lack of a better word, come to terms with everything and what's going on, and that's as well, other than the cancer thing with Starlight Glimmer, Rarity's one especially, is something that, unless you've been through it, it's very hard to approach all of the different things that encompass that particular illness. And I wasn't sure 100% if I think they were able to touch on majority of it, but I'm wondering if maybe given a bit more time and maybe bigger chapters, they could have maybe touched on other aspects of each sort of thing. With Rainbow Dash and Applejack, I don't think there's any point, or with Fluttershy. But when it comes to Starlight Glimmer, Pinkie, and Rarity, they could have expanded the whole thing a bit to address the other issues that come with those particular illnesses, even though Pinkie technically wasn't an illness. But at the same time, would that have caused problems and made it less dramatic? I don't know. It was just a thought as I was trying to think of ideas to talk about. That was pretty much me done. Go ahead, Vladdy.
I'd have to argue I don't think it would have been good to extend it, because then the story would have become about their illness. I think it's best that it didn't linger on those, because then it would be about all the drama surrounding the different illnesses and everything and the health conditions, rather than on the relationships.
Skywriter?
Yeah, I mean, I felt that the story wasn't about, again, I think this sort of comes back around, but the story isn't about these ponies' illness or decrepitude or whatever. This story is about that brief pulse of fear and anxiety. And I think dealing with any of these things and any of these stories in too much depth would take away. I think that I agree. I sort of take away from the fact that the story is about. It's not a classical story, in fact, at all. And in many ways, there's not really character growth. There's not really an arc. Nobody really changes as such during each individual vignette. It's just that wouldn't be what the story is. The story is about the moment of grief and fear, and I think that would take away from it. I would agree.
Clever, do you have anything to add?
Well, the only thing I would say is, in terms of character growth, I think by the end of the story, like I said earlier, that we see these characters who've gone through grief. And as Skywriter said earlier, it's nice to see characters that have come out the other side and have, it shows us them still forming happy memories, kind of. And I kind of feel like the story starts at a place with less anxiety, moves towards the greatest anxiety, and then we move through it. So I feel there is sort of a rise and then a fall and a return, sort of, to a comfortable place. So I would say that it is a complete story, though not a typical one. And just thinking about that, I find is kind of fascinating, to look at this story as I guess that could be a debate that people could get into, what makes a story, and does this have all the pieces of one? And I think it does.
Okay, I think we've kind of talked about this already, but it's worth asking other people their opinions. Did Spike die in the last chapter, or was he just sleeping or hibernating? Vladdy, you asked this one.
All right, let's see if I cut out for this one. I think it was just saying that he was hibernating, like mentioning the smoke coming out of his nose and stuff, but I wasn't sure, and I wanted to double check what y'all thought.
Skywriter?
Definitely sleeping. She winks at him and tells him to dream of unicorns, and I know that you could say dream of unicorns if someone was going to their final rest, but I don't think that's a wink scenario. I think this is her wishing him away for a 100-year nap or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that as well. There's the indication that he's resting. I think the word is restful when she looks at him, which, yeah, there's not an indication that he has popped off, that he has instead gone to sleep. Clever?
So, I'm not disagreeing in that I don't think he necessarily dies at the end of this chapter, but I would disagree about the 100-year sleep. I think that he is close to death. And the reason is that in the chapter, it says, there's this line. Hang on, let me pull the right thing here. All right. So she felt secure there. His shoulders had become a solid and fixed point in the flow of time. But that point had started to shift. She knew what was coming and she accepted it. Now, again, you could argue that that's just his 100-year sleep, but just with the way the whole story is, it really does make it sound like what would she have to accept if he's gone for 100 years? She's like 1,000, she'll be 1,000, it'll be fine, right? But this seems to me to speak to a different kind of transition, that she's going to have to accept it. The other thing is when we look at the author's notes, because he's kind enough to actually provide a blog post where he talks specifically about the story. He says that the final chapter, I hope, was a palate cleanser that really gave the deserved sad tag of the story a more upbeat and sweet ending, without removing too much of the gravitas of the theme or devolving into something like, and they all lived happily ever after. Even though that's how a lot of my stories end, I wanted this one to keep that theme strong and maintain the somber note, but give you a little taste of Spike's future. A happy one with Twilight and the legacy of her friends surrounding them both, because that's how I view life too. even with endings, nothing really quite ends. Even with loss, there are things beyond those lows. The sad things in life make the sweeter ones all the sweeter, so I've been told. So I get the sense that he isn't just going to go for a nap for 100 years and then be tickety-boo. I think this is towards the end of his life.
That makes sense.
I think it can be interpreted either way, and your mileage may vary on whether you think it's gone one or the other.
Yeah, I'd agree. One or the other, but in the end it doesn't really change the meaning of the story.
True. Midnight? Oh, no, sorry, that was you speaking then. Right, is anybody got anything else to add? Blair, words, I'm going to start that again. Does anybody else have anything to add to this point? I'm sorry that I'm pushing this quite fast. It's because I'm conscious of the time from Skywriter saying that he had to go.
Skywriter was clicking.
Skywriter, you've got something to add?
I've got time. I'm not. It's not. We're not in a great hurry. So yeah, no. I think that just to be brief about it. I mean, I don't think he dies in the chapter. I think that Twilight is like again talking about anticipatory grief. She's seeing what is coming. Spike is old at this point in time. I think it's that we can have a middle ground here. I think that she's looking forward. She's anticipating the time when this will be the final goodbye. And I think this all meshes in with anticipatory grief and the themes we've talked about before. So
Clever?
I agree with Skywriter. I think that he doesn't die here, but it's not far off.
That makes sense.
Okay, next point. Verisimilitude in a magical dragon and pony world. The universality of a good story. Clever?
Yeah, that sounds a lot smarter than what I wanted to talk about. So we get together and we talk about pastel horse literature every once in a while. And that's said tongue-in-cheek because, of course, literature seems to be this highbrow thing, while pastel horses seem to be not. And I thought this was a fantastic example of where a well-written story connects with people at an emotional level, and you can forgive and concede so much if you do a good job of making that emotional connection. And I thought this was a great example of, you don't have to be a brony, you don't have to have watched every episode of My Little Pony to read this story and have it hit you in the feels, or even to know exhaustively who these characters were before you read the story. And that's because it's well written and it deals with questions and feelings and emotions that are intrinsic to the human experience, and does, I think, a good job of creating scenarios that encapsulate those experiences. And in sharing them, the reader, goes through, or maybe potentially, if you haven't read too many stories like this, has the opportunity to go through these emotions, and the realness, the honesty of those moments is there, and it's a grounding thing in this story, and it is in such stark contrast to the last story we did that I thought that was fascinating, because the last story we did was grounded in a possible reality that is something that could potentially happen, as far-fetched as it might be, whereas this is grounded in an absolute fantasy world, and yet this one feels more real. The last one we did was, what was it called? Friendship is...
Optimal.
Optimal,
thank you. Yeah, so Friendship is Optimal. No part of it felt quite as real as this story does, because I don't think that story managed to encapsulate such a very real, honest, emotional experience Not that that story was bad by any stretch. It just was sort of this one's opposite. It was still worth a read, but was complete opposite to this. And I thought that that was fascinating all on its own. That the realness of this comes from the emotion, not from the circumstances. And to me, that's good writing.
Anyone got a rebuttal or anything to add to that?
Well said.
Very well said. Very well said.
Skywriter, your little mouth flashed?
Yeah, I felt like there were times when, and this was a point where I was stressed on earlier, I thought I would talk about it here rather than then. I felt that there were times when I felt ejected from the narrative because of, the lack of pastel hoarseness about the story. It is there is quite a bit of it that's very pony-like, but there's a lot of it that's dealing with some very real world medical issues, and I felt that the cancer was a little heavy-handed, heavy-hooved, as it were. I thought that maybe I think that there is a balance that you're trying to strike. You're trying to make things relatable and metaphorically encapsulate the same things that evoke emotions in people's minds. And I'm respectful that this was, and I think we'll talk about this maybe in the next point, that this is sometimes a very literal, especially in Rarities chapter, a very literal experience that the author went through. And I think they did a bang-up job with conveying those feelings to the reader through their word choice, through their prose. And I think that maybe even a next level story could have evoked those same feelings while remaining unambiguously, unassailably, intrinsically equestrian, and dealing with the exact same feelings, the exact same emotions in the audience, while feeling like it was more in tune with the show as it's presented to us. And I realize that there have been background jokes about pony cancer and the background art, or at least implied things like that. I just felt like there might have been a way that in a truly, again, ascended version of this story, that we could have felt these same things, while I never felt like I was ever outside the borders of Equestria, because it felt like a little bit like we were seeing human difficulties presented through a lens, sort of an Equestria Girls type lens, of the ponies were enacting human stories. This felt more like a lot of human stories than a pony story. And I think that a really, really bang up extra version of the story would have been completely equestrian, but also made me feel the same things that this story made me feel.
So we move on to an author's commentary. Carry Me Home. What's it all about? Clever?
Well, I've already read a little bit from it. I just wanted to bring
Do you want to read it out? Because for the benefit of our readers, do you want to read it to them? Readers, our listeners, do you want to read it to them?
I can, if we don't mind. It's several paragraphs, but it's not.
It's less than 1,000 words, if I recall.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just bringing it up. This was written after the fact, and it starts off, I'm sure a fair number of my more regular readers and followers were surprised to see a sad tag on a story. I'm not really a writer that writes sad stuff. I've written sad things, certainly, but most of my stories are, in a word, romantic. They're cute and fun and happy, and bad stuff happens and things get difficult, but the characters typically work things out, and things get back to being romantic. It's my forte, and my skill lies in that kind of character interaction and dialogue. I'm not typically one for the high concept story idea, stealing yet more talking points from Mr. Numbers. I like writing characters and character interaction and drama, so my stories revolve around that idea and focus themselves there. Carry Me Home isn't high concept either. It's in a place that most of us, as we get older, are familiar with. It's a story about changing and aging. I'm swiftly approaching 30. And this is where Clever has to comment, yeah, you're old. Ooh, approaching 30. Anyway.
You're telling me. I'd
Right.
say 40 next month.
Oh, you're old. Ooh, approaching 40.
You know this. You know how old you feel when you pass the big 40.
Yes, I do. I'm swiftly approaching 30, which places me in the middle of the road as far as my peer group of authors here go, and I've lived a very lucky life in most respects. I'll acknowledge that up front so we don't have any illusions between us. I have experienced very, very little loss in my life, for which I count my blessings. That being said, I'm presently dealing with a lot of the themes in Carry Me Home in my own life. The situations, as presented, are basically stolen moments from my own life to a greater or lesser extent, with ponies standing in for real people. I've been wrestling with the specter of impending loss, I suppose, and I have had all of these thoughts and ideas in my head for a while. B_25 came to me with an idea for a commission, which with a very simple premise, one that I grasped onto immediately. An older Spike carries each of the main 6 home in its arms. It's a cute idea, one that I immediately knew I could have fun with. B knows my skill set. So I sat down to write Carry Me Home, and the very first challenge that presented itself was why? Why does Spike need to carry the cute ponies home? I asked. What's going on that's made these typically self-reliant and strong characters require Spike's help in getting home? Well, Spike is older, so they are older too, and Spike needs to be old enough and big enough to be able to pick them up, so they're probably much older. 10 years? 20? What's the age range? What changed? What's been happening to the main 6 while Spike, who is a dragon that will likely outlive them all, has been growing up? My brain pretty quickly jumped on the idea that the main 6 are getting older. Sorry, I have to move the page down.
The magic of editing.
Right? My brain pretty quickly jumped on the idea that the main 6 are getting older, and maybe things that they typically do themselves need a little extra help. As this idea formed, my own recent experiences with my parents, who are now late 50s, early 60s, and my grandparents, who are late 80s, early 90s, came to mind, and suddenly the story being about ponies became less important than the story being about something genuine to my life and experiences, something I could relate to and give some serious soul. So, the rarity chapter, the one that I know hit all of you, judging by the comments. For a few people, it was a more personal experience, and if you're curious, you can read the comments, but I'm not going to draw attention. I want to honor those people that shared their experiences and related their connection to the story. I know that a few people felt very close to the subject matter, and I do too. Let me give you the background on where I was coming from so you can understand it a little better. My grandfather has had a rough run of health over the last few years. A few strokes and TIA episodes have left him not the person he was, to put it simply. A week ago, he suffered another stroke that has in many ways stolen him from us, but for brief glimmers of lucid thoughts and smiles. I went to help my grandparents with some chores around their home this past weekend, and my grandfather was sleeping for most of my visit, only briefly waking up to not recognize me, waking once more to misidentify me as my uncle, and finally to see me as me. I gave him a hug as I was getting ready to leave, and he smiled at me and said, "Jason, are you teaching yet?" It was a good moment, and something that I knew was precious. I wanted that happy moment to be present, and I wanted to give you that, even when the rest of the chapter didn't end on a happy note. The reality needed to be there, because pulling the punch at the end would have been disingenuous to the experience I am having, that I am perhaps dreading. I wanted to write these experiences, and I'll admit I added my typical romantic flair. For all the sad things that happen, for all the little rough moments that build towards harder and harder things, I wanted to keep the string of hope alive, there. Bad stuff happens, but no pony is broken by them. Even in Rarity's chapter, that chapter is the realest and most raw for me, and it shows in the writing. Yet I hope Rarity's last really coherent words stuck with you through that. My grandmother said those to me when she had a frank discussion with me about her and my grandfather's mortality recently. She's a canny woman, and she sees through me as only those who have lived all their lives with you can. She knows the life I've led, and she has done her best to prepare me for the future. The final chapter, I hope, was a palate cleanser that really gave the deserved sad tag of the story of a more upbeat and sweet ending, without removing too much of the gravitas of the theme or devolving into something like "and they all lived happily ever after," even though that's how a lot of my stories end. I wanted this one to keep that theme strong and maintain the somber note, but give you a little taste of Spike's future, a happy one with Twilight and the legacy of her friends surrounding them both, because that's how I view life too. Even with endings, nothing really quite ends. Even with loss, there are things beyond those lows. The sad things in life make the sweet ones all the sweeter. So I've been told, and I feel like my grandmother probably knows that better than I do. I can only hold those words in my heart. So there it is. Carry me home. Thank you for reading. And
Okay.
that's what the author had to say about that.
So why do you think that was something that was necessary for readers to consume?
I don't know that it was necessarily necessary, but I always think it's fascinating when an author chooses to expound on their work, and that you get to kind of hear what they were thinking. And what I think is fascinating is that a lot of the points that they bring up are things that we've already sort of uncovered here without necessarily referencing that. The idea that there is self-insert here, that these are very clearly very honest and real interactions. Even Skywriter's comments that that this feels like that this is humans but with ponies put on. I mean, the author pretty much says as much. So it's I think that people who read the story, I don't think they owe the author anything to read their thoughts on it, but this one in particular, I think, because of the level of verisimilitude, having confirmed that these are based on events and feelings and emotions that are happening to the author, I think could be beneficial to people who read this story and are either triggered or very affected by it, to know that this comes from an authentic place. That the realness that you feel and the trauma that you might be trying to deal with, that that there is a very realness down beneath all of this.
I do appreciate realness.
Right?
Yeah.
As opposed to all that, I can't believe it's not realness.
Bloody?
No, it's just agreeing.
Does anybody have anything to add to this?
No.
Nope, apparently
No.
not. I love when people just don't respond.
We're
Right.
waiting to see if anyone else does.
You're all of you like kids in class when the teacher asks, "Can anybody give me the answer?" and everybody sits on their hands like, "No."
I don't always like to be the one to put my hand up first, because then people look at you and say things about you. Not that that's ever happened.
But should be very used to being embarrassed by now.
I usually just write down the answer and then see if I'm right.
The answer.
Definitely not one I've heard before. Right, Clever, the next point's yours as well.
Uh-huh.
A blind commentator's take, coping with limitations through Pony.
Yeah, I didn't. So one of the commentators that responded to the blog post, who apparently, because I haven't gone through and read every single comment on this particular fic, but they shared a little bit. And actually, if you're reading this fic, reading some of the people's reactions to this fic is, to me, almost as interesting as reading the fic, or perhaps more so in some cases, like this one. So there is an individual who goes by the screen name Yoshio that responds to this, and apparently they give a bit of backstory on them. they thank the author for sharing this personal take on what drove them to write Carry Me Home, and knowing how personal some of the content was certainly takes it beyond making just another story in your growing list of tales. It's a piece that can be looked back on as one that truly put you, your emotions, and your talents to the test. You went beyond your standard style to challenge so much that is often extremely difficult to bring up. Then they go and talk about how they have gone through a descent into total blindness, and that really made him relate with Pinkie Pie's story. This individual was only 37 and lost all physical vision. Despite so many efforts, that's taken a lot away from them. People don't view you the same, nor as much available to you. And so he goes on to liken how Pinkie, that whole story really related to him. But this was something I didn't realize, that this even existed. He said, "Some may know me as the leader of an effort started at BronyCon known as Coping with Limitations Through Pony. I helped present and follow up with it for over 4 years. Each year, my primary efforts with my team were to help show how life doesn't end, nor it is defined by life situations that are far from favorable." So what I thought was fascinating was that because of the story, I learned about that. This whole idea that there was this support group that had formed at BronyCon, and that individuals had been using Pony to help cope with their limitations. And I just thought that was entirely remarkable. And I wanted to share it. And that I wanted to bring to light to that. And as well, obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, there's a very good chance that you're a fan of the show and that you obviously like those little pastel horses. And there might even be a good probability that those pastel horses help you cope. And I certainly know they help me cope. They make me happy when I see my little figurines that I've got stacked in front of me. They bring a smile to my face. And I don't know. I wanted to share that. And I thought that idea, and that this fic resonated with that individual, and that it helped bring to forefront a message that they themselves were trying to spread, I thought was worthy of highlighting.
Anyone got anything to add?
It's very beautiful, and I'm glad you brought that up, Clever.
For a second there, I thought you said that Clever was very beautiful. I was like, he's very beautiful.
I don't know that I am very beautiful, but thank you. It's yeah, I wanted to highlight that.
Well, considering most of us have never seen you in person, we can at least agree you've got a beautiful mind. Having no idea what you actually look like.
I was going to say, I don't know about that either, but okay.
He's green with blue hair. What are you talking about?
True.
Right?
Right, okay. That does, in fact, bring us to the end of our points. So we're into final thoughts, and then we shall be spinning the wheel to see who will be picking a fic for next time. Well, I think there's not many people who actually can. I think it's only Skywriter can, actually, so it doesn't even require spinning the wheel.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because Skywriter, I think you're the final one in this round. Everybody else has picked one in this round.
Pressure's on me then.
So have a think about what you want to pick while we do final thoughts. So I'll start with Clever. What are your final thoughts?
Yeah, like I said before, the fic broke me. I'm not upset about that. I felt it's very much a cathartic release. I don't read a lot of these kind of stories, so for me, it was, I think, a good representation of the genre. Even though I can't comment on the rest of the genre, I just know that it affected me greatly, and I don't really feel the need to seek out other similar fics, only because I feel like they would be more pale in comparison in general. If you want to see a vignette-style story told very effectively, trying to look at something that's sometimes a little harder to examine through the concept of story, I feel like this does a great job of taking different perspectives on this idea of anticipatory grief, and I think it does a fantastic job of it. I think it's a story that, if you want to write stories, that you should look at for its form and its function, and I think it's a good story if you just like catharsis. Just a trigger warning for those of you who have gone through tragedy. If one of them lines up with this, that could be either good or bad, I guess. Just know that it's hard not to feel reading the story.
Vladdy?
I very much like this story. Especially in this fandom with the immortal alicorns and dragons, it can be really hard to like find something good that isn't, oh, boo-hoo, I outlived my favorite people and now I'm going to be sad or have a fill-in arc. But this is a nice breath of fresh air with having a healthy take on how to deal with grief and anticipatory grief. I very much appreciate that. It reminds me of the anime movie Makuya, but with less drama and murder. Very good. I definitely recommend it.
Red rum.
Red rum.
I have no concept for what movie you're talking about, so that just came the fuck out of nowhere. That Skywriter?
Art's a funny thing. I think it could do a lot of things for a lot of people. And whatever the story did for me or for anyone, I think that I really hope that it helped the author compartmentalize, process, and see their own feelings in a new light. And I can't think of a better goal for art than to understand yourself and your own feelings better.
Well said, sir.
And finally, Midnight.
Well, yeah, I love this story. It was literally admittedly, it was the second choice. The first choice was just too long, sadly. But this was like the top of the one that I wanted. I was like, yes, we have to choose this one. And I don't regret it. I'm glad everyone has enjoyed it. I still love it. Yes, there are certainly good things you can nitpick about it, but that's nitpicking. That's not how you enjoy the story. And it's well written, and I enjoyed recording it. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and it's a good story for anyone who just likes these sort of things. Just have a box of tissues or two beside you. And maybe just have a therapist on the call, just in case.
I was a mess. I was such a mess. Just hot, streaming, snotty mess.
I'm sorry. I must admit, I am very cynical. I was not, but I must admit, of this particular genre of stories, this was a particularly well-written example of that genre. And that's what I will say as my final thought. So we're going to pretend that I spun a wheel because, oh look, it's Skywriter is our next Fic Picker.
Yay!
Skywriter, what are we going to be?
Yay.
What are we going to be analyzing
Yay,
next time?
hooray. So I was on the fence here because there were two stories by Horizon that pretty much wrecked me personally. And those two were Quiet Boy and Moonhorse and Administrative Angel. And between those two stories, I think Administrative Angel gives more people more to talk about. So that's what I'm going with. Administrative Angel by Horizon.
Thank you. Because I've got to admit, I fucking hate the other one. I love Horizon's work, but that's just, I don't like that story. But Administrative Angel I've not read, so this will be fun. So next time, Administrative Angel by Horizon. With that, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Clever Hooves.
Goodbye.
Goodbye from Midnight.
Psst, midnight.
Goodbye from Midnight.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Goodbye!
I am totally going to leave that in. Goodbye from Skywriter.
Stay happy and stay pony.
And goodbye from Vladdy.
Goodbye, and make sure to have a lovely day.
Aww.
Aww.
And goodbye,
Now,
boy.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Bye.
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 Fuck off, everyone.
Go.